Khandanam bhava bandhanam jaga bandhana bande tamay niranjana nara rupa dhara niranjana nara rupa dhara nirguna guna mochana agha dushana jaga bhushana chid dhana kai gyanan janam vimala nayana gyanan janam vimala nayana vikhane moha jai bhashar bhava sagar chira unmada prema pathar bhaktar janam yugala charana bhaktar janam yugala charana tarana bhava par jrim heta yoga ishara jaga ishara yoga sahai niram dhana samahita mana niram dhana samahita mana nirakitava kripa jana dukha ganjana karuna karma kathor pranar pana jagat tarana pranar pana jagat সার হে নার বার ত্যাগীশ সার হে নার বার দেহ পদে অনুরাগ নির্ভয় গাত সংশয় দৃঢ় নিশ্চয় মানস वान निष्कारण भगत शरण निष्कारण भगत शरण तजे जाति कुल मान संपद तव श्रीपद भव पुष्पद वारि यथा प्रेमार्पण समदर्शन प्रेमार्पण समदर्शन जग जन दुख जाय संपद तव श्रीपद भव पुष्पद वारि यथाय प्रेमार्पण समदर्शन प्रेमार्पण समदर्शन जग जन दुख जाय नमो नमो प्रभु वाक्यमनातीत नमो नमो प्रभु वाक्यमनातीत मन वचनैका धार प्रभु मन वचनैका धार ज्योतिर ज्योति उजल हृदय कंदर ज्योतिर ज्योति उजल हृदय कंदर तुमि तम भंजन हार प्रभु तुमि तम भंजन हार नमो नमो प्रभु वाक्यमनातीत नमो नमो प्रभु वाक्यमनातीत मन वचनैका धार प्रभु मन वचनैका धार ज्योतिर ज्योति उजल हृदय कंदर ज्योतिर ज्योति उजल हृदय कंदर तुमि तम भंजन हार प्रभु तुमि तम भंजन हार धे लंग रंग भंग बाजे अंग संग मृदंग धे लंग रंग भंग बाजे अंग संग मृदंग गाइছে छंद भक्त वृंद आरती तमार गाइছে छंद भक्त वृंद आरती तमार जय जय आरती तमार हर हर आरती तमार शिव शिव आरती तमार खंडन भाव बंधन जग बंधन गुरु महाराज जी की जय। ओम ह्रीं ऋतं त्वमचलो गुणजित् गुणेभ्यः नाक्तं दिवं सकरुणं तव पादपद्मं मोहं कषं बहुकृतं न भजे यतोऽहं तस्मात् त्वमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो भक्तिर्भगश्च भजनं भवभेदकारी गच्छन्तलं सुविपुलं गमनाय तत्त्वं वक्त्रोद्धृतोऽपि हृदये न मे भाति किञ्चित् तस्मात् त्वमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो तेजस्तरन्ति तरसा त्वयि तृप्त तृष्णां रागे कृते ऋतपथे त्वयि रामकृष्णे मर्त्यामृतं तव पदं मरणोर्मि नाशं तस्मात् त्वमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो कृत्यं करोति कलुषं कुहकान्तकारी शान्तं शिवं सुविमलं तव नाम नाथ यस्मादहं तु अशरणो जगदेक गम्य तस्मात् त्वमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो ॐ स्थापकाय च धर्मस्य सर्वधर्मस्वरूपिणे अवतार वरिष्ठाय रामकृष्णाय ते नमः। ॐ नमो श्री भगवते रामकृष्णाय नमो नमः। ॐ नमो श्री भगवते रामकृष्णाय नमो नमः। ॐ नमो श्री भगवते रामकृष्णाय नमो नमः। ॐ सर्वमङ्गल माङ्गल्ये शिवे सर्वार्थ साधिके शरण्ये त्र्यंबके गौरी नारायणी नमोस्तुते। सृष्टि स्थिति विनाशानां शक्ति भूते सनातनी गुणाश्रये गुणमये नारायणी नमोस्तुते। शरणागत दीनार्त परित्राण परायणे सर्वस्यार्थे हरे देवी नारायणी नमोस्तुते। जय 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 महामाई की जय। जय भगवान श्री रामकृष्ण देव की जय। जय स्वामी जी महाराज जी की जय।
Hello, check. Namah Shri Atirajaya Vivekananda Sure Satchit Sukhasvarupaya Swami Netapaharine. So we were studying this lecture, Maya and Freedom of Vivekananda. And last time we had discussed the contradictions that define the scientific quest, namely this quest for knowledge in nature, and how it is that it is the conscious part of it, the conscious aspect of that knowledge, the human dimension, that is accorded regard, and not just the external manifestation of power. This is something that has been brought out fairly explicitly in this last paragraph. And Vivekananda emphasizes that it is not the manifestation of power per se that is accorded respect, that is accorded regard. Why? Because insentient nature itself brings with it far greater manifestations of power. The power of an atomic bomb, the power of an H-bomb, the power that drives our homes and hearts, both creative and destructive, are as of nothing compared to the powers that manifest in nature through tsunamis, through earthquakes, and through the creation of stars. So it is really in the knowledge of these powers. भाई ये कट कर दो भाई, वो बास जो है वो पूरा कट कर दो, नहीं तो ये फीडबैक आता रहेगा. चलेगा? ठीक. हाँ. So the thing is, it's precisely this conscious aspect of power, which means knowledge of the forces that act in nature. It is that human dimension that is accorded regard, that is accorded respect, not the physical manifestation of power per se, but rather what we as a species, we human beings, do with that power, that is important. Without that power, we cannot use it for either what we call good or what we call bad. So, manifestations will be less if we have no knowledge of what conduces to power. But on the other hand, once that power is there, then it depends on us how we use it. This higher dimension, the first, I've repeated this several times here, that there are two aspects of the higher brain functions in human beings. One is analytical. This is what allows us to excavate into the heart of nature and extract knowledge from it. This is the discriminatory or analytical faculty in our minds or brains. On the other hand, there's the altruistic aspect, which allows us to unite with other human beings on this planet to think of this larger population as aspects of oneself. In its most benevolent form, this takes the form of altruism. Wisdom, therefore, comprises of what we do with the knowledge that our analytical faculty extracts, and for what larger benefit we can use it. Yeah? This is the locus of wisdom. And so, the answer to the question that Vivekananda raises here is that the answer to why the regard is accorded to discoverers of truths in nature That answer cannot be sought in external nature per se, but rather it has to be sought in what defines us as human beings in our subjective consciousness, not in the sense of limited subjective consciousness which is restricted to opinions, but rather in terms of that which is universal in the human experience. These are the norms that we use. You think about it and you will see that great and deep discoveries that we as human beings accord respect to, they're almost invariably to something that a person has said which has a certain universality about it. Something that is universal in the experience of several human beings. It is precisely there when something touches that universal aspect of human life that it gains greatness. Okay, now let's come to the next piece of contradiction that Vivekananda outlines and again says that this is an instance of what in Vedanta is called Maya. The senses drag the human soul out. Man is seeking for pleasure and for happiness where it can never be found. For countless ages, we are all taught that this is futile and vain. There is no happiness here. But we cannot learn. It is impossible for us to do so except through our own experiences. We try them and a blow comes. Do we learn then? Not even then. Like moths hurling themselves against the flame, we are hurling ourselves again and again into sense pleasures, hoping to find satisfaction there. We return again and again with freshened energy. Thus we go on till, crippled and cheated, we die. And this is Maya. Here, the first one was the quest for knowledge in nature. This paragraph summarizes the human quest for joy in and through the senses. External sources of joy. Things that we try to catch onto and assume that they are going to give us joy. But such joys are very short-lived. Very often they vanish soon after they appear. How many times have we thought that if I get such and such a thing, if I possess such and such a thing, I'll be the happiest person on earth, or I shall be extremely happy. And then we gain that, and it lasts for a while, and then is gone. The joy is gone. The thing is there. If I possess a certain large car, I'll be very happy. If I possess a certain huge library of books, I'll be happy. But is the joy really there? And a moment's thought tells us no. It's basically the reaction of our subjective consciousness to this object outside that constitutes joy or satisfaction. And so, it is we who have convinced ourselves that this external object that we seek and the reaction that we call joy or satisfaction, that these are inseparably bound with each other. Without bothering to ask ourselves the simple question, is that really true? Is my possession of a huge car, of a huge library as a personal property really my source of joy? This subjective reaction that we call joy or satisfaction on the one hand, and the external object in the form of a possession or something even noble, or something that we fancy to be, say, nobler. Possession of a big house, possession of a bunch of people who come and accord their obeisance to us. Are these things, these objective things from the outside world, and this subjective reaction that we call joy or satisfaction, are they really inseparably bound up with each other? This is the question that the discriminatory mind asks, or the Viveka. This is the root of Viveka, discrimination, analysis. It's separating out in our minds the objective source from the subjective reaction. Once the mind starts focusing on this connection, Viveka, from which Vivekananda comes, that Viveka has started. Analysis has started. Discrimination has started. And how to strengthen that? The strengthening only comes by the reaction of the mind's realizing, understanding with great clarity that the answer to this question of whether there is an inseparable connection between a source of satisfaction outside, a physical source of satisfaction outside, and the subjective reaction of joy or satisfaction, whether there is an inseparable connection between these two things, the answer is no. The answer that we go on with without asking, the aviveki mind. This is what Shankara calls moha. Moha he defines as lack of discrimination, aviveka, lack of analysis, lack of questioning our subjective experience. This moha, this attachment, what we call attachment in day-to-day language, is what's called moha, and Shankara defines it as aviveka, the opposite of this analysis. The so-called common sense approach to reality. This basically, it's an excuse for mindlessness, not applying our minds to our subjective problems. That's what moha is about. That's what aviveka is about. Once this analysis sets in, and then we give ourselves this answer, no, there is no inseparable connection, there is no sacrosanct connection between the source of satisfaction in the external world and our subjective feeling of satisfaction. Once we understand that, the reaction, the test of our understanding, the test of whether that understanding is really true or whether it is merely a superficial intellectual assent for impressing others, or for worse reasons like fooling ourselves. What really is the test? There has to be an experimental test to see whether this Viveka has really set in or not. And that test is what is called Vairagya. Ranjate. Yeah? Ranjate iti raga. That which even the ragas in classical music, yeah? In Hindustani classical music or Carnatic, Indian classical music in general, the word is raga, it's the same word. Where does it come from? That word comes from ranjate. Ranj is the dhatu, colors. That which colors the mind. There is this famous sitar player called Nikhil Banerjee, disciple of Alauddin Khasab, from whom Ravi Shankar and Ali Akbar learned their art. Nikhil Banerjee died young. There's a biography of his which is there available for those of you who want to see it. It's called That Which Colors the Mind. Yeah? It's a translation, it's a loose translation of this single word raga. It's the same word that is there at the etymological basis of this word vairagya. Vi purvak ranj dhatu. Yeah? Virag. Ghai. That's the pratyaya. Basically, it means it removes this coloring. Remove the coloring from the mind. The mind has this tendency to dwell on a bunch of things and feel that, look, without these things I cannot exist. Once the question sets in, this feeling that we have that I cannot live with such and such thing or such and such object or such and such person, etc., etc. The question, once it starts, is this really true? And one comes to the answer invariably through one's own experience, through the analysis of one's own subjective experience. Once the answer is no, then does the mind become ready to give up this sense of without such and such I cannot exist. Once the mind gives that feeling up, that is called vairagya. It is not necessarily throwing away external things per se. The question is the mind in equanimity whether these external things exist or do not exist? The test is to be found when the mind exists more or less in the same kind of equanimity, whether the object is there in our field of consciousness or not. That is what vairagya is about. It's not forcefully throwing away something and then sitting in the quiet of one's room with the mind whirling around that object. Yes? So, that's what vairagya is about. So, vi purvak ranj dhatu ghai. So, that's basically when that coloring of the mind is gone, that vairagya sets in. The first step, therefore, is this analysis, viveka, and the fruit of that is this disassociation of the subjective will. I want this is an exercise of will. No, I have no need for this anymore. If it comes, fine. If it does not come, equally fine. This is what vairagya is about. The function of this mental function of willing to hold on to something, that freedom has come to the mind to hold or to release. That is what vairagya is about. Let me give an instance from the lives of one of our former presidents. And a subsequent president of ours had narrated this story to me and described the former one as somebody in whose behavior you could see this detachment, tyag, renunciation, vairagya, as manifest as a very natural quality. The first person I am referring to is Swami Ranganathananda, our 13th president of this order. He was in charge of one of our ashramas, pre-partition, in Karachi. During the horrors of partition, some miscreants had come and set fire to part of that ashrama. Swami Ranganathananda was outside. When he came and saw that this is the state, there was no anxiety, no reaction, no emotional turbulence. He simply said, okay, so this work is now done, let us go back. It happened to him in a couple of places, once here, once at the onset of the Second World War in Rangoon. Essentially, see, here is the kind of test, because yes, attachment to external objects. Well, once the mind starts dwelling at a slightly higher level, that attachment sort of falls off fairly easily. However, imagine a person who has spent a fair bit of time, years, invested in building up something, and then sees it being destroyed in the presence of one's vision, I mean, in front of oneself. At that point, can one retain one's equanimity? We usually give all kinds of justifications. Oh, no, this is some noble thing that I have created. The problem is not with the thing that is noble or not. The problem is with our reaction. I have created. That's where this attachment is to be found. And if you can see that this person is completely unaffected, it means that during this number of years, when he was constructing this thing for a larger benefit, that construction had been done with Viveka and Vairagya, with dispassion, not because one wanted anything personal out of it, or in the work itself one got one's satisfaction immediately, and the mind hankered for nothing in the future. It was not building for oneself some place where one could find a place of security, of satisfaction, of joy in years to come. This particular aspect of the mind, a clean, clear, alert mind, engaged in action. These lectures are from Gyana-Yoga, but this quality of the mind, clean, clear mind, free of hankering for the future or regret for the past. This is the quality of the mind that in another set of lectures, the Karma Yoga lectures, that Vivekananda emphasizes above everything else. I've said this here, and it sounds very simple. When we do something, whatever it be, how much of the mind is put on that work per se? See, this does not require any belief in any system. It does not require any theology. But it does require an honest commitment to introspection and understanding where one's mind is. In other words, it calls for a tremendous honesty in practice at every moment. During a work, if I am thinking of, out of this work I shall get something and that will get me this or that or something or the other, my mind is actually wandering about in some imaginary reality in the future. Similarly, I have done this and that, such and such thing in the past. This kind of thing is going to work that I'm doing now is going to undo it. That's the same mind wandering about in some silly rigmarole constructed out of past memories. Whereas the Buddhists say, where is past, where is future, except in the present? The notion of past, the notion of future exists only When we are thinking of the present as the now, it is with respect to this that the future or the past are defined. But forgetting this present moment, once we allow our mind to be lost in the future or the past, then we have lost the greatest thing that we have available to us at this very moment, namely the present. Karma Yoga in Vivekananda's thing and mindfulness in Buddhist practices are more or less the same thing. It's in terms of the actual practice, there is no difference. Emphasizing doing everything with one's whole mind and heart. This is see, when we walk, we walk. When we eat, we eat. When we talk, we talk. This is the simple thing that this Karma Yoga is instructing us to do. Doing anything that we are doing. If we are taking rest, take rest. But the problem is that we fragment our minds. Part of it does this, part of it does that. And this awareness is not maintained of the mind. So a fragmented mind is what we now regard as natural. It's the same mind. When its powers become focused, its powers become harnessed, that we become capable of greater good both to ourselves and to those around us. So this is what, we started with this business of how we seek joy in our externals. We came to this notion of vairagya, dispassion, and then come to this notion of these two qualities, viveka and vairagya. And it's precisely these two qualities which, once they become ingrained in our minds, we find it that easier and easier to fix our mind on the job at hand. You don't need any belief in any theological system for this. It's a simple thing to say, very hard to practice. But even if it's very hard to practice in its ideal form, it is not going to happen to us unless we put in a little bit of effort every day. And the advantage is we can put it into practice any moment in our lives. Because most of the time when we are awake, we are actually doing something. The least that we are doing is breathing. Well, fair enough. How about breathing consciously? This breath we take in, are we aware that we are breathing in, breathing out? That's work. Being aware of that is doing work consciously. And in this Vedantic language, that is what Karma Yoga is about. When we are walking to a certain work that we have to do, can we focus on that walking? That is part of the same practice. When we are eating, when we are studying, when we are taking rest, is the full mind engaged? We tend to think of this sitting quietly with our arms on our laps and closing our eyes in a practice of meditation. That is supposed to be quote-unquote spiritual practice, and some other thing tending to some people who are suffering and distributing food, etc., etc. All that is somehow secular activity. This is a silly, stupid notion which is completely archaic. If you sit down to meditation with a mind that is completely scattered during the day, the same mind will be scattered during meditation. If any job that you do has been done with focus and concentration, that same focused mind with concentration is going to find it easier to concentrate when you sit quietly. Here, this particular paragraph, what has been emphasized again is this particular thing that we seek satisfaction without. But our experiences are bound to deliver blows in return if we have gone into it with this mindless assumption that satisfaction lies outside. Without external sources, we cannot have subjective satisfaction. This is just a belief, and it is not true. So, the question that is being raised here, this is essentially this, that look, we are trying, we meaning all of us, our attention is directed outside and we seek satisfaction there. And we receive blows in return, which are basically telling us that these convictions that we have are false. It is basically telling us to examine our belief system, which is unconscious. Ask questions of that belief system. And then, once that questioning starts off, Viveka has set in. In the absence of that Viveka, what we have is Moha, and this cosmic aspect, or this large universal human experience aspect of this individual Viveka, individual Moha, is exactly what is called Maya. This is what is being said here. Here, the starting point was defined as the seeking of satisfaction through the senses and the futility of it, and our lack of understanding of where this futility comes from. Why? Because underlying this futility is an assumption that we have not bothered to question. And once we question those assumptions and decide to throw away this attachment, this belief in the inseparability of a source of satisfaction outside and the reaction of satisfaction within, once that starts and it decides to throw away these external sources of satisfaction, then we find that the answer to this conundrum of what one calls Maya, in terms of sensory satisfaction, in terms of sensory experiences, the solution to that conundrum starts dawning in our hearts. We'll take this up from here next time. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Tat Sat. Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.